Go and open to Psalm 24 with me. Psalm 24. When I had been preaching for a few years, I had run through a couple of Bibles that sort of worn out on me. The binding wasn't good, just kind of low-quality Bibles. So I decided I should probably get a nicer Bible, one that'll last. And so I decided on this one, a nice goatskin leather Bible, which I enjoy quite a bit. It lies totally flat on the table from Genesis to Revelation. It's very nice. And hoping to have that for a long time, maybe even a lifetime, I decided to keep some records in the back of it just to remember things. And one of the things that I do is I write down every time I go preach some new place I hadn't preached before. And so it's with great pleasure that when I get home, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to write down the Northwest Church of Christ in Beaumont, Texas, and remember this nice weekend that we had. Thank you so much for coming, and I appreciate the kind words. I knew this church. What I know about this church was I knew your preachers, and I respected them quite a bit. And I know Roger and Dorinda Lambert, and they have nothing but good things to say. And so I can echo with my own two eyes, I've seen it. And I'm very happy to have been here. This is Psalm 24 and verse 1. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. Who shall ascend to the hill of the Lord? And who shall stand in his holy place? Here's an answer to that question. He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false and does not swear deceitfully. He will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? Answer, the Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. Allow me to begin by describing three types of Bible readers. So the first type of Bible reader is what I'm going to call Mr. First Century. For this person, the Bible is mainly a repository of interesting historical tidbits. Mr. First Century loves to learn about ancient history. He loves to learn about ancient culture, ancient archaeology, ancient literature. His favorite word is the word ancient. The Bible is mainly of interest because of what it says of God's dealings in the past. The second type of Bible reader I want to describe is what I'm going to call Mr. 21st Century. This person is obsessed with relevance when they read the Bible. Their favorite question, or rather they're not so much interested in what God used to do like Mr. First Century, they're mostly interested in what God does for them today. Their favorite question reading the Bible is, what does this mean for me? What relevance does this have for my life? And so the Bible is of interest because of the relevance it has for my life today. So we've got Mr. First Century, we've got Mr. 21st Century, and the third type of Bible reader I'm going to call Mr. Age to Come. This person's obsession is with the last things, the second coming of Jesus, the eternal state, heaven and hell. They would say something like this, isn't salvation what it's all about? Spending eternity with God. Ancient history, current events, this won't mean much to us in heaven, so let's just mainly talk about that. This is definitely the guy who's grilling people in the checkout line with the question, do you know where you'd spend eternity if you died today? And so for this man, the Bible is of interest mainly because of what it says about the last things. Let me ask, which of these people do you think has it right? I'll bet you'll find it easiest to justify the one you're most like. And so Mr. First Century will argue, you can't understand what the Bible means to us until you first understand what it meant to them, the original readers. He might say, look at how much of a mess we make when we rip the Bible from its original context and we twist it to fit our agenda. To which we say, good point, Mr. First Century. Mr. 21st Century will say, yeah, but what use is the Bible if you can name all the kings of Judah in order if you know everything there is to know about the Jebusites, but you don't know how to live in the world today? How much does that really help us? The Bible isn't just God's word for people 2,000 years ago, it's God's word for us too. To which we say, good point. Well, Mr. Age to come will say, yeah, but isn't heaven what it's all about? You know, it's cute. You're interested in history, Mr. First Century, and you're interested in ethics, Mr. 21st Century, but what use is any of it if we don't have hope of eternal salvation? To which we say, fair enough. I think each of them does have a point. And I also hope you'll agree that to choose one of these to the exclusion of others would be a huge mistake. Because Mr. First Century also needs God to tell him how to be a good husband today. And Mr. 21st Century needs to be grounded in the word of the Bible before he runs off making the Bible say things it was never trying to say. And Mr. Age to come probably needs to read 1 Thessalonians when Paul told that group of people they needed to get up and start being disciples now instead of sitting on their hands and waiting for Jesus to return. The Bible needs to be read in all three tenses, past, present, and future, because the Bible tells the story of a God who was and who is to come. That's what Revelation 1 and verse 8 says. God has been working in all three tenses. God was sovereign throughout history, God is sovereign today, and God will be sovereign for all eternity. And I believe Psalm 24 is a text that really brings in these three tenses together. It doesn't ask us to choose which was our favorite era of God's rule. It doesn't ask us to choose whether to be Mr. First Century or 21st Century or Age to come. It tells us to worship and serve the God who was and who is to come, and to always keep those three tenses of God before us whenever we think of him. So I want us to think about this. Our outline is easy enough. I've already given it to you. God's kingship is displayed in every era, beginning here in the beginning. The God who was, the God who ordered the cosmos. So what we have in verses 1 and 2 is an assertion in verse 1, and then a reason, a justification for that assertion in verse 2. And so verse 1, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. That's the assertion. Here's the justification. 4, he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. Verse 1 says, the earth and everything on it belongs to God. Who says? If I said that, you'd laugh me out of the room. You'd call me crazy if I said this is all mine. So why isn't it crazy when God says that? Well, because, verse 2, he founded that earth upon the seas. It's God's earth because he made it and he put everything on it. Now, just as soon as you make an earth, then that earth and everything on that earth will belong to you. But as long as we are living on God's earth, and we are, it will all belong to God, the God who made it. Now, there's actually a little more going on here, I think, than first meets the eye. I want you to notice in verse 1, the psalmist doesn't actually say God created the earth, or rather this is verse 2. He doesn't say God created the earth, rather he says he founded it, or he affixed it atop the seas. And that's an interesting way to put it. God is not described as creating an earth out of nothing, though he certainly did that. But rather he is described in verse 2 as bringing order to the earth out of chaos, giving foundation to something that would otherwise be chaotic. And people who know about ancient Canaanite mythology say that telling the story this way, God affixing the earth atop the sea, telling the story this way would be sort of a direct shot at these Canaanite myths. So the story goes that before the foundation of the world, before the beginning of the world, there was a god called Yam. The name Yam means sea. He had an alternate name, Nahor, which means river. So this is a god of water. And this god, Yam, ruled over a watery chaos. Now, to ancient peoples, the sea was a mysterious, dangerous, chaotic place. I mean, it still is to some extent. We are still discovering species of sea life at the bottom of the ocean. There's crazy things living very deep down there. To think of it another way, this is sort of mind-blowing to think about, for me at least. We have spent far more time in outer space than we have spent at the bottom of the ocean. We know a lot more about what's going on up there than we do down there in some ways. So when the Canaanites imagined a god of the sea, that god represented chaos and danger. But then in their mythology, along came a heroic god named Baal. And Baal came along and he defeated and he subjugated Yam. He conquered the chaos by establishing dry land for people to live on. He brought order to this chaotic, watery mess. And this is part of the reason why Baal is such a prominent god in the Old Testament among the Canaanite peoples, and occasionally Israel falls into worshiping him. It's sort of their king in the pantheon of gods based on that story. Baal is the one we can be grateful to for giving us this land to live on. So when the psalmist uses, not necessarily Genesis 1 language of creation, but rather more Canaanite language of subduing the seas and the rivers, he is saying something like this: our God is the true God who conquers the chaos. Our God is the actual God who orders the world and who subdues any rival. What the psalm is saying is that our God is what Baal only pretends to be. Our God is the real champion of the gods, the real hero of mankind, the true king of the world we should be grateful to and worship. You know, it's interesting, when the Bible talks about idolatry, it doesn't just say one thing about it. It doesn't just say other gods don't exist, though certainly it does say that, and that's true. But sometimes what the Bible does is it sort of plays along a little bit. It says, all right, I'll grant you your point for a minute, and then it says something else. So Deuteronomy 10 and verse 17, for example, puts it this way: the Lord your God is God of gods. It kind of says, let's imagine for a moment Baal did exist. Well, you know what? Jehovah would whoop him too. Sometimes it adapts the stories of false gods to declare the supremacy of the true God. Psalm 18 does this at great length. It brings out these stories of the Canaanite gods, and it puts the true God, the one true God, above all of them. So what do you have in these opening verses? What you have is a testimony to God's rule based on the most ancient history there is. Because God has founded the earth, because God has ordered the cosmos, the earth and everything on it is his. And there is no rival who can lay claim to God's authority because of that. No other god, Yam or Baal. No other king, Pharaoh or Caesar. No other nation, Assyria or Babylon. Now, just as soon as they make a cosmos out of the chaos, then they can lay claim to it as their own. But as long as we inhabit this cosmos, this earth, it belongs to the God who founded it atop the seas. Now, if verse 1 can be taken seriously, that also means you can substitute literally anyone in for this general statement. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell in it. Just put anyone else's name in that. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and the Assyrians who dwell in it. The world and the Babylonians who dwell in it. Substitute any menacing threat you can imagine, and it'll still be true. The world and the terrorists who dwell in it. Everyone and everything is under his rule, whether they think they are or not. But I also want to say you're not done with verse 1 until you've put yourself in the verse. The world and the Drew Nelsons who dwell in it belong to him. And so the psalm opens by saying, go into the most ancient history there is, and you'll find an undeniable statement of God's supremacy, of God's kingship. Mr. First Century should be very pleased to hear this. Which brings us to number 2, to the God who is. So in verse 3, the psalmist goes from the most ancient history possible to his own present day. So we know the earth and everything on it is God's because God founded it. But the question is, how does this ancient history actually translate into people's lives today? Mr. First Century is over here saying, okay, now make it relevant to us. What difference does this make? This is verse 3. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? Answer, he who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false and does not swear deceitfully. He will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him and who seek the face of the God of Jacob. What we're supposed to imagine here are religious pilgrims on their way to the temple. So verse 3, the hill of the Lord, that is Mount Zion. And his holy place, the end of verse 3, is the temple that sat on top of Mount Zion in Jerusalem. And as the worshipers prepare to ascend that mountain, they may well have recited or sung a question like this to each other in preparation for worship. Perhaps one person began and said this: "Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place?" It's an invitation for the worshipers to scrutinize themselves. Are they fit for this task they're about to embark on? Not only are they walking on the earth God established atop the sea, as verse 1 said, they're now doing something even greater than that. They are traveling up to the metaphorical pinnacle of this earth, to the holiest place on God's earth where God's own presence dwells. And what this question is meant to convey to those who answer it is, this is not something you do lightly. This is something that not everyone is worthy to do. You don't just waltz up here. And so the response comes in verse 4. The worshipers would repeat back how they're ready for this. Verse 4 says, here's the kind of person worthy to ascend to this holy hill. Here's the kind of person worthy to enter God's presence. And basically the message is this: only a holy person can stand in this holy place. There are 4 expressions of holiness in verse 4. The first is that we are holy in our work. It says, he who has clean hands. This type of person is worthy to ascend this hill. He who has clean hands. Our hands are what we use to do things with. We use our hands to work. We use our hands to exert effort. God said in Isaiah that he would no longer hear Israel's prayers because your hands are full of blood. You will go about your life oppressing and being violent and doing all this evil, and then you come to me with these hands to offer sacrifices? I don't think so. Worship is not the time where we make weekly amends with God and get clean so that we can go out and make our hands dirty again with sin and then repeat again the next week. Paul said men who pray should lift holy hands, that we should have prepared ourselves to pray and worship having lived lives of cleanness. So who is worthy to ascend this mountain? The first answer is he who has clean hands, he who has been holy in his work this week. The next answer, here is worthy, the one who's been holy in his thoughts. A pure heart, he says. In other words, the holiness of the true worshiper is not just a pretense. It's not a facade. It's not a put on. It's who they are. They don't do holy things so they'll be seen as holy. They do holy things because they are holy people from the inside out. He's the real deal. He's holy not just in his outward actions. He's holy in his thoughts. I think the next answer goes even deeper than that. Here's the next person that's worthy to ascend this mountain. He who is holy in his admirations. It says, he does not lift up his soul to what is false. To lift up one's soul is to give our affection, our admiration, our worship to something. The question being raised is, worshiper, are you holy in what you admire? Okay, you know the right moves. You know you're supposed to go worship God at the temple. You know you're not supposed to be morally impure and all that. Good. But here's the question. Do you actually kind of secretly admire the tough guy kings of the Canaanites? Do you look at David and you say, I wish he was a little more like that Jebusite king? When you look at the cult of Baal, you know you're not supposed to do all that, but do you look at that and do you sort of envy the cult of Baal and its licentious ritual? Do you sort of envy the fact that the pagan worshipers don't really care that much about morality? You can do what you want as long as you make the sacrifice. Do you sort of wish that your religion was that way? For you, does holiness mean just stifling what you truly admire? And what you truly admire is that which is false, and that which is vain, and that which is empty. He's going very deep here. Are you holy in what you admire, worshiper? And finally, in verse 4, the worshiper worthy to ascend this hill is the one who's holy in his words. He says, he who does not swear deceitfully. The most literal way to swear deceitfully would be to undertake an oath to someone with no intention of fulfilling it. To sign a contract you have no intention of honoring. The point more generally, though, is to break vows with people. To break vows with other people is to break our vow to God. To be unfaithful to other people is to be unfaithful to God. All of life conforms to this pattern of holiness, this says. Not just our dealings with God, but with our neighbor too. We don't swear deceitfully to them any more than we would swear deceitfully to God. So what's the message of this back and forth in verse 4? I think basically it's a reminder to all who would approach God to worship, it's a reminder of the truth of verse 1. of just how deeply true verse 1 is. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell in it. He is the Lord of all people, and He is Lord over every aspect of the lives of all people. And of course that means we worship Him on the Lord's Day, but it also means remembering He's still the Lord on the other days, because we're still on God's earth, aren't we? He's the Lord in my work, and He's the Lord in my thoughts, and He's the Lord in my admirations, and He's the Lord in my words, and He's the Lord in all my relationships. So what do we have in this middle section of the psalm? What we have here is a contemporary application of God's sovereignty, of God's kingship. What do you do with this ancient information about God's foundation of the world? What does it look like to live in light of verse 1? Well, it looks like ascending His holy hill to worship in verse 3, though not as an empty ritual, not as a one-day-a-week bone we throw to keep God off our backs, but worship as a culmination of a whole life of holiness, verse 4 says. Learn to live in light of that ancient history today. Verse 5 says you'll find blessing, and you'll find righteousness, and you'll find salvation. And so we turn to Mr. 21st Century and we say, is all of that relevant enough for you to apply God's ancient kingship in this way? That brings us to number 3, to the third tense of God's kingship, and that is the God who is to come. Let's read verse 7. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Question: who is this King of glory? Answer: the Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. In verse 9 it sort of repeats. Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Question: who is this King of glory? Answer: the Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. Now, what's this all about? I have to admit, this is the most puzzling section of this psalm. But there is a scene being painted here. We're supposed to imagine something. The scene is being painted here of a king approaching the gates of his city, maybe his capital city, maybe just one of the cities in his empire. Perhaps he's been away on a military campaign. And so as he approaches the city, the front man of the king's procession calls out to the watchman at the gate. So imagine this in verse 7. Lift up your heads, O gates. The front man of the procession, of the king's procession. Lift up your heads, O gates. Be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Well, the watchman replies in verse 8, who is this King of glory? He's not supposed to just open up for anyone who says some highfalutin words about who's coming. And so the reply comes in the second half of verse 8. Here's the answer to the question, who is this King of glory? It's the Lord, strong and mighty, the Lord, mighty in battle. The answer is, whose coming is the only true king there is. Whose coming is the one whose earth it is. Whose coming is the king without any rival. Whose coming is the king who wins every battle when someone challenges his rule. Whose coming is the king returning to his city to reign in glory. And so, the crier says, ready the welcoming committee, set everything in order, because the king has returned to sit on his throne. Now, I am told that beginning sometime after the Babylonian exile, this psalm became a part of a regular rotation of psalms which were sung weekly. If I remember correctly, it turns out this psalm was sung on every Sunday, on the first day of every week. It's not hard to see how this psalm would really resonate with the hopes of Israel after their exile. The Davidic line of kings had seemingly been permanently deposed. Israel had no sovereignty of its own. Their temple had been destroyed, and when they got the new one up, some of the old heads said it wasn't up to snuff. This wasn't the temple it used to be. They were all anxiously awaiting the return of God to his people and the arrival of the Messiah. When he came, he would make it all better. We are waiting for God's king, the new Davidic king, to come reign over us. This psalm deeply connected with the future hopes of Israel. This is the conundrum that post-exile Israel found themselves in. Yes, Our God founded the world. We know that. We know Genesis 1. And yes, we know we're supposed to be busy worshiping Him, serving Him today in light of that ancient history. Yes, we know that. But the question that continued to stay over them was, when will our God finally return in victory? The great promises of Isaiah don't seem like they've come true yet. We need the God who is to come, Israel said. It's easy to see how this last part of the psalm would connect with those future hopes. And I think it still connects with the future hopes of Christians too. You know, there's actually a Greek word used in the New Testament which precisely describes a scene like verses 7 through 10. I'm no Greek scholar, I'll probably say it wrong, but the word is parousia. Parousia. It's a word in our New Testament that's translated in the English, arrival or coming. But as a more specific meaning than just arrival in the first century, it's a word that was used to describe the royal visit of a king to a city in his empire. When the king came to town, what you don't do is sit on your rear end at home and wait for the king to swing by the house so you can say hi. That's not what you do when the king comes to town. What you do is you throw open the gates at the first sign of his arrival, you roll out the red carpet, you send out the welcoming committee, you have a banquet prepared in celebration of his arrival. Especially if he's doing something like returning victorious in battle. There is a celebration in order because the king has returned in glory and in victory. The king's arrival means everything is going to be okay. And this is the word they use to describe that, parousia, the arrival of the king. Do you know how this word is usually employed in the New Testament? Mainly in this phrase, the coming of the Lord, as in the second coming of Jesus, the time at which the king returns to save all of his people, living and dead, and to dispense with all the forces of darkness once and for all. That is the event, the return of King Jesus, which remains at the center of our hope. So let me just show you a few examples. Paul ends the book of 1 Thessalonians expressing this hope for his readers. He says, "Now may the God of peace himself sanctify you completely, and may your whole spirit and soul and body be kept blameless at the coming," that's the word, coming, of our Lord Jesus Christ. The return of the King, Paul says, is what I am writing to prepare you for. I need you to be ready, all of you, inside and out, for this event. This is James 5 and verse 7. "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming," that's the word, coming of the Lord. The King is returning, and we need to learn to patiently await and anticipate his arrival, never forgetting that's the culmination of our hope. Or 1 John 2 and verse 28, "And now, little children, abide in him, so that when he appears, we may have confidence and not shrink from him in shame at his coming." We want to be people, John says, who are ready to throw open the gates to welcome Jesus at his return. We don't want to be found not expecting him, not prepared for his arrival. No, our lives are spent preparing for that arrival. You know, it may even be the case that the scene Paul describes in 1 Thessalonians 4, the scene where Jesus is descending from heaven and all his people, living and dead, are caught up to meet him in the air. It may even be the case that Paul is playing off the imagery of the kingly arrival. That there is so much excitement at the return of the king that we don't just open the gate for him and wait politely. We run full sprint to meet him on the road. What I want you to see in this psalm is that the center of our hope, of our future hope, is in verses 7 through 10. This is it. The king finally returns, and all those who recognized his kingship and worshiped him in holiness all along are ready to be the welcoming committee. We saw it coming. We were hoping for it to come. And so Mr. Age to come finds his future hope in this psalm too. So this is the point. God is king in every era. Pick anywhere on the timeline of history, and God will be shown to be king. Go back to the beginning and see what God was. The founder and establisher of the cosmos, which gives him rights over all he made. He is God without rival. Yam and Baal have nothing on him. Go forward to the end of history, to the second coming of Jesus, when God's rule will be so undeniable that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess his lordship. And where does that leave us now? What does it mean for us in the 21st century, knowing that history begins and that history ends with a sovereign God? Well, what does it mean? It means like living like he's Lord now, because he is. It means treating him as holy, yes, in our worship, but also in our work, and in our thoughts, and in our admirations, and in our words. And so whether you tend to be Mr. First Century, whether you tend to be Mr. 21st Century, or Mr. Age to Come, the affirmation all God's people come to make is that he is the King of every century. He is the God who was and who is to come. And thank God that he is. Maybe there's someone here this evening that realizes you have not been living like God created the world. You've not been living like he is Lord over all, including you. You've not been treating him as holy in all your life, and you have not been expecting him to come again. The Bible says he will. He is God. He rules your life now, and he is coming again. If there's anyone that needs to come and get their life right so that when the King returns, it will be a happy day for you, come forward now as we stand and sing.